A poor woman stood at a billionaire's gate, asking for just 1 minute. He didn't just refuse her. He humiliated her. Guards stepped in, pulling her away. And then, something slipped from her pocket. A watch. Old. Worn. Ordinary. But the moment it hit the ground, the billionaire froze. Because that watch was never supposed to exist anymore. Power can hide many things. Money can erase the past. And silence can bury the truth. But some secrets refuse to stay hidden. Sometimes, they come back when you least expect it. Not with noise. Not with warning. But with something small. Something you thought was gone forever. Today's story is about a man who controlled everything. Until one unexpected moment forced him to face a past he thought he had escaped. Welcome to Prime Tale. If you love emotional, powerful stories filled with twists, secrets, and moments that leave you speechless, you're in the right place. Make sure you stay till the end. Because this story, it doesn't just unfold. It hits. Victor Callahan was a man who had everything: wealth beyond comprehension, influence that shaped industries, and a reputation built on control. His mansion's gates, tall and imposing, had witnessed countless visitors: sycophants, business partners, beggars, and opportunists. None dared approach him uninvited. Yet, on that sunlit morning, a woman walked confidently toward his gate. She was young, dressed in simple, worn clothing that betrayed poverty, but her eyes were sharp, observant, unwavering. Her steps were measured, almost deliberate, as if she had walked this path countless times in her mind before physically stepping forward. In her hands, she clutched a small satchel, light but seemingly heavy with purpose. Victor's guards noticed immediately. Their instincts flared, warning of a potential disturbance, but their master had seen it all. He himself stepped out, a commanding presence in a sharp black suit. His voice, when it cut through the morning air, was cold and final. "You don't belong here," he declared, gesturing sharply. The guards moved closer, a subtle threat hidden in the way they shifted, prepared to remove her from the property. The woman did not flinch. She held her ground, steadying her breathing. Her hand brushed against the small pocket in her satchel, where something metallic rested. A subtle movement, unnoticed by most, yet monumental in consequence. A small wristwatch slipped from her pocket and fell to the stone driveway. Sunlight reflected off it, catching Victor's sharp gaze. For a man like Victor, used to dominance and control, the watch stirred something long dormant. His expression shifted, subtly at first, from anger to shock, an emotion he rarely displayed. There was a recognition in the glint of that object, though he could not yet place why. The woman bent slightly, retrieving the watch with a careful, deliberate motion. She held it close, as though it carried her father's strength and secrets. Victor's hand twitched as if to reach for it, but he restrained himself. He needed to assess, to understand before reacting. "I need to speak with you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension. Victor stepped forward, controlling the rage that threatened to spill. "I don't have time for this," he said sharply, his tone attempting to reclaim authority. "Step away." She did not. Her eyes met his with an intensity that suggested history, familiarity, and a purpose he did not yet understand. The guards tensed, unsure whether to intervene further. Victor's mind raced. The watch, so small and ordinary, tugged at a memory buried deep. A man, his long-dead rival, and a promise that had never been fulfilled. That object carried weight beyond its size, a weight that threatened to unsettle the empire he had spent decades building. Time seemed to slow as he watched her, every movement calculated, precise. She tucked the watch back into her satchel, securing it as if aware that it held power beyond measure. Victor could not move, could not speak. The rules of his world of dominance, control, and intimidation were being rewritten in a single moment by the presence of a woman and a small glowing object. Finally, she turned and walked away, her steps purposeful, leaving Victor staring after her. The watch glimmered faintly in the sunlight as it had once before in his mind, a silent reminder that the past never truly stays buried, and that the consequences of his actions were always waiting unseen to rise again. As the gates closed, Victor realized that what had begun as a trivial confrontation was far from over. That small, ordinary object had opened a door, and the woman had the key. In his hands, wealth and power could buy anything, but this time, they might not be enough. Elena walked away from the mansion gates, her heart pounding but her step steady. The sun reflected off the small wristwatch in her satchel, a relic from her father that held memories, warnings, and secrets she barely understood. It had slipped from her pocket at the exact moment she needed it to capture Victor's attention. He had seen it, recognized it, and for the first time, he had paused. That hesitation would become her advantage. She moved quickly through the streets, weaving between merchants and early shoppers, always alert. Victor's estate, though massive, was not impervious. Every security camera, every guard, every motion sensor was a detail she had accounted for. The watch was not just a keepsake, it was a tool, a key, a message to the man who had destroyed her family years ago. Victor, back inside his office, could not focus. The image of that small object haunted him, glinting almost alive, revealing something he had long tried to forget. His mind raced through possibilities, connections he had thought dead and gone, people erased from his life. And then the memory struck her father's face, the promise made, the betrayal, and the injustice that had allowed him to rise while the rest of them suffered. The guards tried to interrupt his thoughts, offering mundane updates on business deals and schedules. But he waved them off. Every word they spoke felt distant, irrelevant. The world had shrunk to one tiny object and the woman who dared to approach him. She had done something no one else had. She had forced a crack in his armor. Elena stopped at a quiet alley, crouched slightly, and examined the watch. Its intricate design, worn from years of use, held an engraving she hadn't noticed before. A series of letters and numbers that seemed random at first, but to her father, it had been a secret code, a map of hidden truths. The very thought sent shivers down her spine. Meanwhile, Victor searched through his office drawers, recalling old contacts, former allies, and people who had crossed paths with her father. The realization began to dawn on him. She was no ordinary woman, and the watch was no ordinary object. It held knowledge and power beyond his initial assessment. Elena's mind worked rapidly. She needed to plan her next move carefully. The watch had drawn him out, and now the game had begun. Every step she took, every calculated glance, was meant to manipulate the narrative. Victor's arrogance and overconfidence were his weaknesses, and she intended to exploit them fully. Back at the mansion, Victor could not rest. He replayed the encounter over and over in his mind, analyzing every detail, every expression. He knew instinctively that she would return. He didn't know when or how, but the tension gnawed at him. The empire he had built on strategy and foresight now faced a threat he could neither predict nor control. Elena, safe for the moment, allowed herself a faint smile. The first move had been made. She had introduced uncertainty into the life of the man who thought he could dictate fate. The watch had done its job, it had disrupted the equilibrium, and now the real game could begin. The morning air was crisp as Elena sat in a quiet cafe across town, the wristwatch resting on the table before her. She traced its contours, remembering the lessons her father had imparted. The watch was more than a timepiece. It was a repository of secrets, a silent guide to uncovering truth. Each tick was a reminder that time was fleeting, that the opportunity to act was limited. Victor, meanwhile, could not shake the memory of the encounter. His advisors noticed the change in him, the restless energy, the unusual tension in his normally measured demeanor. He called in several old associates, people who had once been loyal to him but who now carried their own grievances. He needed information, clarification, anything that could explain the significance of the watch. Elena's research into the watch revealed its hidden compartments. Tiny engravings hinted at financial records, hidden locations, and clues left by her father. It was as if the object itself had been designed to unfold its secrets at the perfect moment. She realized that if used correctly, it could not only expose Victor's misdeeds, but also restore her family's dignity and fortune. Victor, growing increasingly uneasy, ordered a full review of the mansion's security footage. He replayed the moment the watch fell, frame by frame. Each time, he felt a tightening in his chest. That small object had triggered a cascade of memories, some he wished would remain buried. He remembered past rivals, unfinished business, debts unpaid, promises broken. The realization dawned. Elena was not acting blindly. She knew exactly what she was doing. Elena began connecting dots, business patterns, Victor's past dealings, and the legacy of her father's warnings. Each revelation reinforced her strategy. Patience, observation, and precise action would allow her to dismantle Victor's empire methodically. She was no longer the helpless visitor. She was the orchestrator. Victor, sensing the encroaching threat, attempted to regain control. He increased surveillance, contacted allies, and tried to anticipate her next move. But every effort felt reactive, a step behind the calculated precision that Elena wielded with the watch as her guide. By nightfall, the tension had shifted. Victor's confidence was shaken, while Elena's determination grew stronger. The watch had served as the catalyst, turning a chance encounter into a strategic advantage. It had transformed uncertainty into power and unpredictability into opportunity. The game had evolved, and the stakes had never been higher. The mansion was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Victor paced his study, the echoes of his own footsteps emphasizing the tension that had settled over him. Every glance toward the security monitors made him more aware of Elena's influence. The simple fall of that watch had appended the meticulous control he believed he had over every aspect of his life. Meanwhile, Elena had retreated to a small, discreet apartment several blocks away. The watch lay on the table before her, catching the fading afternoon light. She examined it carefully, noting the subtle engravings and hidden mechanisms she hadn't noticed before. Every component seemed to hint at a broader story, one that connected her father's legacy with Victor's empire in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Victor's mind churned. The woman had not only approached him at the gate, but she had done so with a confidence and precision that suggested inside knowledge, intimate knowledge of his life. He couldn't fathom how she had obtained such information, yet every instinct in his body warned that ignoring her now would be a grave mistake. Determined to regain control, Victor sent a formal invitation to Elena. The letter was precise, cold, and carefully worded, an offer for a meeting that implied cooperation while leaving room for negotiation. He hoped to unsettle her, to draw her into his world on terms he dictated. Elena received the note with measured calm. She considered her response carefully. Accepting the invitation could give her access to the information she needed, yet it also carried risks. Victor was unpredictable. One misstep could undo everything she had meticulously prepared. Yet, she recognized an opportunity, one that could allow her to confront him directly and leverage the power of the watch to her advantage. The day of the meeting arrived. Elena approached the mansion once again, this time with confidence born of preparation. The gates opened, and she stepped onto the marble path, aware that every move was being observed. Victor, standing at the threshold, examined her closely. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension that radiated from him. As they exchanged formal greetings, the watch rested discreetly in Elena's bag, its presence almost imperceptible. Yet its influence was palpable. Victor's calculated composure faltered ever so slightly as he tried to anticipate her strategy. The room itself seemed to shrink under the weight of unspoken history, past betrayals, and the promise of revelations yet to come. Elena spoke first, her voice steady, her words carefully chosen. She hinted at knowledge of Victor's past, of misdeeds long forgotten, and of the consequences he had never anticipated. Each phrase, each inflection, was designed to unsettle him, to remind him that the balance of power had shifted. Victor listened, his eyes narrowing. Every instinct screamed that he was being manipulated, yet he could not discern the full scope of her plan. The watch, concealed yet potent, continued to exert its quiet influence, guiding her decisions, and dictating the rhythm of their interaction. By the end of the meeting, Victor was left with more questions than answers. The woman he had dismissed at his gate had returned stronger, more assured, and armed with secrets he could not yet comprehend. And Elena, holding her father's watch close, understood that the next moves would determine the fate of more than just their confrontation. The entire empire hung in the balance. Night had fallen over the city, the mansion's lights casting long shadows across the manicured gardens. Elena sat in her apartment, reviewing documents she had secretly acquired over the past weeks. Each one connected to Victor's financial dealings, his private transactions, and his attempts to cover past misdeeds. The wristwatch glimmered faintly under the lamplight, as if reminding her that patience and timing were her greatest allies. Victor, restless and frustrated, combed through his records, replaying every interaction with Elena in his mind. He realized that he had underestimated her intelligence, her patience, and her strategic acumen. He began to suspect that the encounter at the gate was only the first act of a meticulously planned scheme. Elena began coordinating subtle moves, sending hints and clues through indirect channels. Her influence spread quietly, almost invisibly, into Victor's world. She manipulated circumstances without being seen, ensuring that each step provoked reactions, forced decisions, and exposed weaknesses. Meanwhile, Victor's frustration grew. His attempts to anticipate her actions only seemed to play into her hands. The more he tried to control the situation, the more elusive she became. Every letter, every message, and every slight alteration in his environment carried the fingerprints of her strategy. The wristwatch remained central to her plan. It was not merely symbolic. It contained information codes, patterns, and encrypted data that could reveal hidden vulnerabilities in Victor's empire. Elena had learned to read it, understand its hidden language, and use it to guide her next actions with precision. As days turned into nights, the tension escalated. Victor's empire, built on dominance and control, faced a silent siege orchestrated by a woman he had once dismissed. Elena moved with confidence, guided by the watch, while Victor struggled to regain command over events slipping through his fingers. The silent revenge had begun, and neither the magnitude of her actions nor the inevitability of their consequences could be ignored. Each subtle maneuver, each calculated pause, and each hidden message brought the confrontation closer to a climax that neither could yet imagine. Victor's attention to detail had always been legendary. Yet, despite his vigilance, he could not anticipate the chain of events unfolding before him. Elena had positioned herself strategically, each move calculated to provoke reactions and uncover weaknesses. She was everywhere and nowhere at once, her influence felt but unseen. The wristwatch had become a guide, revealing patterns and opportunities that Victor could not yet recognize. Elena understood timing in a way that made her nearly untouchable. Every step she took was deliberate, designed to draw him into traps he did not see until it was too late. Victor intensified surveillance, scanning for any sign of her presence or communication. He questioned associates, cross-referenced financial documents, and traced patterns he had assumed were private. Despite all his resources, he felt a growing unease. There was a precision in her actions, a quiet certainty, that eluded even his greatest intelligence assets. Elena watched from afar, orchestrating outcomes without being detected. She guided decisions, manipulated perceptions, and subtly influenced events. The wristwatch's hidden secrets revealed vulnerabilities in Victor's empire, and she exploited each one with surgical accuracy. The tension escalated when Victor discovered small anomalies, unexplained transactions, unexpected leaks, subtle changes in personnel behavior. Each discovery hinted at a carefully designed campaign of influence, yet he could not trace it back to her directly. Elena's power grew quietly, invisibly, yet undeniably. She had become the unseen force shaping Victor's world, setting traps that he walked into unknowingly. The silent struggle between control and unpredictability reached a crescendo, with the wristwatch as the fulcrum of the entire conflict. Victor realized he could no longer act passively. The subtle manipulations he had tolerated now demanded confrontation. He attempted to counter Elena's strategies, deploying resources, threatening contacts, and exerting pressure on the edges of her influence. Elena, however, anticipated his responses. Every action Victor took was mirrored by a calculated reaction, guided by the watch's intricate patterns. The confrontation became a mental chess match, each side maneuvering to control information, influence decisions, and predict the other's behavior. Victor's frustration mounted. His empire, once impervious, now trembled under invisible pressure. He recognized her growing power, yet could not fully comprehend the scope of her strategy. Elena remained several steps ahead, using patience, observation, and precision to maintain dominance. The wristwatch's secrets were slowly revealed, providing Elena with the leverage necessary to continue her campaign. She used it not as a weapon of aggression, but as a key to unlock understanding, anticipate behavior, and orchestrate outcomes in her favor. By the episode's end, Victor was forced to confront the reality of his situation. He faced an adversary whose intelligence and determination rivaled his own, and whose quiet power threatened to dismantle the world he had built. The mansion was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Elena approached, her father's watch secure in her bag, every step measured, deliberate. Victor awaited, aware that the culmination of their silent war had arrived. Inside the office, the atmosphere was electric. Victor's calculated composure was strained by months of subtle challenges, manipulations, and revelations. Elena, confident and resolute, confronted him with evidence, strategy, and the symbolic power of the watch. Each word spoken carried weight. Every gesture, glance, and pause was part of a larger narrative. The empire Victor had built on dominance and intimidation faced its greatest test, the intelligence, patience, and courage of a woman he had underestimated. The confrontation escalated, emotions raw, histories unveiled. The wristwatch, once a simple object, revealed truths, secrets, and legacies that bound both of their fates. Victor realized that control was no longer absolute. Influence, power, and morality had intertwined in ways he could not fully dominate. By the end, both stood in a tense silence. Elena's plan had reached its peak, the consequences inevitable. Victor, confronted with undeniable truths, recognized the depth of her strategy and the courage behind her actions. The final balance had shifted, and the world they occupied would never be the same. The watch, glowing faintly in its final position, symbolized resolution, revelation, and the undeniable power of foresight, courage, and calculated persistence. The mansion was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Elena approached, her father's watch secure in her bag, every step measured, deliberate. Victor awaited, aware that the culmination of their silent war had arrived. Inside the office, the atmosphere was electric. Victor's calculated composure was strained by months of subtle challenges, manipulations, and revelations. Elena, confident and resolute, confronted him with evidence, strategy, and the symbolic power of the watch. Each word spoken carried weight. Every gesture, glance, and pause was part of a larger narrative. The empire Victor had built on dominance and intimidation faced its greatest test, the intelligence, patience, and courage of a woman he had underestimated. The confrontation escalated, emotions raw, histories unveiled. The wristwatch, once a simple object, revealed truths, secrets, and legacies that bound both of their fates. Victor realized that control was no longer absolute. Influence, power, and morality had intertwined in ways he could not fully dominate. By the end, both stood in a tense silence. Elena's plan had reached its peak, the consequences inevitable. Victor, confronted with undeniable truths, recognized the depth of her strategy and the courage behind her actions. The final balance had shifted, and the world they occupied would never be the same. The watch, glowing faintly in its final position, symbolized resolution, revelation, and the undeniable power of foresight, courage, and calculated persistence. The moment of honesty didn't fix anything. It broke everything open. Because now, there was no denial left. Only consequences. Elena stepped back slightly, her mind racing. For years, she had built this mission on anger, on clarity, on a single narrative. Victor was the villain. Her father was the victim. But now, there were cracks in that story. And she hated it. "You think admitting it changes anything?" she asked. Victor shook his head. "No." "Good," Elena said quickly. "Because it doesn't." Victor didn't argue. Because she was right. But something had already changed. Not in the past, but in what came next. Across the city, Victor's empire was already beginning to feel the pressure Elena had set in motion. Accounts flagged. Deals delayed. Partners questioning. What started as subtle disruption was now escalating. And Victor knew it. "You've already started dismantling everything," he said. Elena didn't deny it. "You built it on something broken," she replied. Victor nodded slowly. "Maybe I did." That calm acceptance confused her again. "Then why aren't you stopping me?" she demanded. Victor looked at her carefully. "Because I want to see how far you'll go." That answer caught her off guard. "Why?" she asked. Victor held the watch in his hand. "Because this isn't just about revenge anymore," he said. Elena's expression hardened. "It is for me." Victor stepped closer. "Then finish it." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Real. Because suddenly, this wasn't a game. It was a choice. And choices had consequences neither of them could fully control anymore. Elena stood at the center of everything she had worked for. Victor's empire was weakening. The truth was exposed. The power had shifted. This was the moment she imagined for years. So why didn't it feel like victory? She looked at the watch again. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Time doesn't just reveal truth. It tests what you do with it." She clenched her fist. Because now, she understood. This wasn't just about exposing Victor. It was about what came after. Victor watched her carefully. He could see the conflict. The hesitation. "You can destroy everything," he said quietly. Elena didn't respond. But then what? He continued. That question lingered. Because revenge had an ending. But life didn't. Elena finally looked up. For once, she said, you don't control how this ends. Victor nodded. I know. And he meant it. That was the difference now. No manipulation. No strategy. Just truth. And choice. Days later, the world shifted. Not with an explosion, but with a decision. Elena didn't destroy Victor's empire completely. She exposed the truth. Publicly. Carefully. Strategically. Enough to change everything. But not enough to become what she hated. Victor lost power. Influence. Control. But not everything. Because Elena didn't take everything. She chose not to. And that choice defined the ending. The final meeting between them was quiet. No tension. No war. Just understanding. You could have ended me, Victor said. Elena nodded. I know. Why didn't you? She looked at the watch one last time. Because my father didn't raise me to become you. Victor didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. The watch ticked softly. Time had done its job. It revealed the truth. And in the end, it revealed who they chose to be. The city had not forgotten. It never did. News of Victor Callahan's exposure had spread slowly at first, like a whisper moving through closed rooms. Then it grew louder. Headlines began to question. Partners began to distance themselves. Deals that once closed in hours now stalled for days. And for the first time in decades, Victor was not in control. He stood by the window of his office, looking out over the skyline he once believed he owned. The same buildings that reflected his success now felt distant, almost unfamiliar. Behind him, the office was quieter than usual. Too quiet. No constant calls. No urgent meetings. Just space. And silence. The kind of silence that forces a man to think. Victor adjusted his cuff slowly, a habit more than a necessity. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Same suit, same posture, same presence. But not the same man. Not anymore. A soft knock came at the door. Come in, he said. His assistant stepped in carefully, her usual confidence replaced with hesitation. Sir, the board wants to meet again. Victor didn't turn. Of course they do. They're discussing restructuring, possibly removing you from executive control. There it was. Spoken out loud. Not a threat. Not a rumor. A reality. Victor nodded slowly. Schedule it. The assistant lingered for a moment, as if expecting resistance. When none came, she quietly stepped out. Victor remained still. Because the truth was, he had expected this. Not the speed. Not the intensity. But the outcome. Power built on cracks always collapses eventually. He just never thought he would be standing there when it did. Across the city, Elena sat at a small wooden table in a quiet cafe. The watch rested beside her. It looked the same. Unchanged. But everything around it had shifted. People passed by outside, unaware of the role she had played in reshaping one of the most powerful men in the city. She should have felt something stronger. Victory. Relief. Closure. But instead, there was a quiet weight in her chest. Not regret. Not exactly. But something close to it. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, her eyes drifting back to the watch. Her father's voice echoed again. Power reveals people, but so does what they choose after it's gone. Elena exhaled slowly, because she was beginning to understand something she hadn't expected. Taking Victor down hadn't been the hardest part. Living with what came after. That was different. Days later, the boardroom was filled. Executives sat around the long table, their expressions carefully neutral, though tension lingered beneath the surface. Victor entered without hesitation. No delay. No dramatic pause. Just calm. Measured. Controlled. He took his seat at the head of the table not out of authority, but out of habit. The chairman cleared his throat. Victor, we appreciate you coming. Victor gave a small nod. I assumed I didn't have a choice. A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged. We need to discuss the future of the company, the chairman continued. Victor leaned back slightly. Then let's not waste time. The directness unsettled them, because they expected resistance, denial, fight. But what they got instead was acceptance. We're proposing a transition, another member said. A step back from your current role. Victor looked at him, steady, unbothered. And if I refuse? Silence. Then the chairman spoke again. You won't. Victor held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he smiled faintly, not sarcastic, not bitter, just knowing. You're right, he said. That was it. No argument. No power play. Just truth. Because for the first time, Victor wasn't trying to win. Later that evening, Victor walked alone through the empty halls of his office. No staff. No noise. Just echoes. He stopped at his desk. The same desk where the watch had once been placed. Where everything had shifted. Slowly, he reached into his drawer and pulled it out. The watch. He had kept it. Not as a reminder of defeat, but as something else. Something he was still trying to understand. He turned it over in his hand. Time. That's all it ever measured. But somehow, it had measured him, and found him lacking. Victor sat down. For the first time in years. Not to work. Not to plan. But to think. And in that quiet moment, he realized something power had never taught him. There are things in life you cannot fix with control, only with truth.